World War II includes some of the most intense and brutal episodes of the 20th century, featuring scenes of extreme violence, forced confinements, and mass disappearances. Within this context, enigmas arise that remain unresolved even after decades. Some cases involve disappearances without complete records, while others include discoveries like the supposed Nazi train hidden underground in a region of Poland. Although more than 80 years have passed since the end of that war, many of these episodes still lack verifiable answers. What are those 25 specific events that remain unclear even today? Who revealed Anne Frank's hiding place? For decades, many versions have tried to explain how German officers managed to find Anne Frank, her family, and others hiding in a building in Amsterdam. The most widespread theory indicates that someone in their circle informed the secret police, which led to the arrest of the 8 occupants of the hidden annex. However, a new review suggests that everything happened by coincidence while investigating another unrelated activity. The team at the Anne Frank House Museum analyzes fragments from the young girl's own diary to understand what happened. In an entry written in March 1944, she mentions the arrest of 2 men who were trafficking food coupons, which were exchanged for food during the German occupation. These people had ties to the company operating at the same address as the hiding place. She notes that once captured, they no longer had access to those vouchers. According to this new approach, the agents searching the building in August 1944 were not actively looking for persecuted people, but were following a lead related to document forgery. Some official records indicate that those involved in that operation worked on cases related to money and jewelry movements, without specializing in tracking down Jewish hiding places. The length of time they spent at the location also raises doubts, as it exceeded by far the usual duration of a quick capture operation. For years, several people have been pointed out as possible informants, including an employee of Anne Frank's father, his wife, or a collaborator with the German authorities. None of these accusations have been confirmed with conclusive evidence. This recent investigation suggests that the family might have been discovered due to the attention generated by irregular activity of other people operating on the same property. Anne Frank died shortly after in a concentration camp. Her father, Otto Frank, was the only survivor among the 8 who lived there in hiding. He managed to recover his daughter's notebook and publish it, making it one of the most well-known testimonies about the German regime in the Netherlands. The Nazi fugitive who died in the shadows of the Vatican. Otto Vector, one of the high-ranking officials of the Nazi regime in occupied Poland, managed to avoid the Nuremberg trials despite being implicated in the mass deportation of over 130,000 people, including thousands of children. While his former peers stood before international courts, he hid in the Austrian Alps for over 3 years until he reached Rome using a false identity and the help of a secret network. In the Italian capital, he took refuge in an ecclesiastical residence while planning his escape to South America. The clandestine escape route he used, known as the Rat Line, connected several fugitive Nazis to safe destinations through collaboration with figures within the church and, according to some documents, with the approval of certain U.S. sectors interested in using the information these men could provide in the new Cold War context. Wechter lived under the name Reinhardt and kept in contact with his wife Charlotte, who sent him letters with affectionate nicknames and even sold stolen art to finance his hiding place. Amid this environment, he died under circumstances that were never clarified. His body was blessed by an Austrian bishop who knew his true identity and supported him during his secret stay in Rome. His son Horst preserved for decades a huge collection of letters, diaries, and personal documents revealing not only the family's closeness to Nazi ideology, but also compromising details about Vector's involvement in the extermination machinery. Horst, however, defends his father's figure and suggests he may have been a victim of a covert plan. Philippe Sands, author of the book that reconstructs this case, finds evidence pointing to several hypotheses, but none prevail. The closeness to SS members, the visit to a former officer before his death, and the involvement of intelligence services leave open the possibility of a covert operation. More than 7 decades later, Vector's death remains unanswered. The mystery endures. The treasure of Edwin Rommel. During the final months of the conflict in North Africa, the German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and his subordinates accumulated a large amount of looted goods while his unit operated in Tunisian territory, specifically on the island of Djerba. The estimated value of this loot exceeds £20 million in gold, jewelry, and other high-value items belonging to Jewish citizens of the region. This operation, carried out by elements of the Third Reich, is part of a series of systematic confiscations executed by various German units in museums, private properties, and public spaces of the territories they occupied throughout the conflict. After the war ended, numerous accounts began circulating about large volumes of wealth hidden by Nazi soldiers who planned to retrieve them later. Although the treasure is often associated with Rommel's name, some indicate that he did not participate directly in its transport. However, the story remains known as Rommel's gold. According to available testimonies, the stolen items were sent to Corsica, an island located between France and Italy, with the intention of later transporting them to German territory. The original plan involved maritime transport from Corsica across the Tyrrhenian Sea, but supposedly the cargo sank before reaching its destination. This episode sparked the interest of treasure hunters and was even mentioned in a James Bond novel, where 2 divers died trying to find the lost treasure. One of the most cited testimonies comes from Peter Fleig, a 21-year-old Czech engineer who reportedly worked with Rommel as a military diver. After working on clearing naval mines and recovering vessels in the Italian port of La Spezia, Fleig received secret orders from Captain Ludwig Dahl to travel to Corsica. There, he was entrusted with a mission under total confidentiality. Upon arriving in the city of Bastia, the captain took him to an old German barracks where 3 lieutenants were coordinating the next phase of the transfer. When the initial plan to cross Italy by land failed due to air attacks and ambushes, the group decided to submerge 6 metal boxes in waters near the coast to recover them later. Years later, investigators found a family photograph of an SS officer detained at the Dachau camp. On the back of the image were coordinates pointing to a location near the coast of Bastia. It is believed they might be linked to the exact location of the cargo. However, the passage of time and exposure to salt water may have damaged the boxes, leaving the treasure buried under the seabed. Any attempt to recover it would require a complex and large-scale technical operation. The disappearance of Heinrich Müller. Heinrich Müller, who held the position of chief of the Gestapo during the Third Reich, is one of the figures closest to the decision-making centers of the Nazi regime. His whereabouts after the fall of Berlin in 1945 remained for decades one of the great mysteries of the war's end. He was last seen inside the bunker where the main Nazi leaders gathered during the final days of the conflict. At that time, Müller stated he would not allow himself to be captured by Soviet forces. From then on, no searches conducted by British or American authorities were able to confirm whether he escaped to South America or died during the final battles in the German capital. Much later, historian Johannes Tuchel presented evidence suggesting that Müller died in Berlin in 1945 and that his body ended up in a Jewish cemetery. According to his research, the corpse was first buried on land near the Luftwaffe headquarters and later moved to a mass grave in the Berlin Mitte cemetery. This cemetery, established in the 17th century, had been desecrated by the Nazis during the conflict and, at the war's end, contained 16 mass graves with remains of over 2,700 people who died during the bombings and collapse of the city. Tuchel gained access to documents linking this information with the testimony of an East German gravedigger who remembered burying an individual dressed in a general's uniform. The decorations found with the body matched those awarded to Müller during his career, and German and American records support this version. According to the historian, all elements agree in indicating that the Gestapo chief is indeed buried at that location. Müller had been a policeman in his youth and received military training during World War I. Later, he joined the SS and worked under the direct command of Reinhard Heydrich. In 1942, he attended the Wannsee Conference, where the so-called final solution was defined. His role as a bureaucrat of terror placed him among the main responsible for the Holocaust and the execution of Soviet prisoners. The possibility that his remains share ground with victims of the same regime generates rejection, although religious rules prevent exhumations, leaving part of the mystery unanswered. The secret that Göring took with him before his conviction. Hermann Göring prevents the execution of the sentence handed down by the Nuremberg Tribunal by making an unexpected decision just hours before the scheduled time. On October 15, 1946, around 10:44 at night, he ingests a substance inside his cell. He does so despite the security measures imposed by the Allied forces, raising a question that persists for decades. How did that substance get into his hands? Since his capture, Göring represents the highest-ranking Nazi leader remaining in Allied custody. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Heinrich Himmler had already disappeared from the scene, and Martin Bormann had not been located. During the trial, the former Reich Marshal attempts to position himself as a central figure among the accused, intervening firmly in the hearings and leaving a strong impression during the sessions. Still, his recent career was affected by his drug dependency, strategic failures leading the Luftwaffe, and his distancing from the core of Nazi power. In the final days of the conflict, he was removed by direct order of Hitler after proposing to assume leadership should the Führer no longer be able to continue. In prison, he managed to regain some energy under the supervision of Colonel Burton Andrus, significantly reduced his weight, and formed relationships with some American officers. One of them, Lieutenant Jack Wheelis, with whom he shared a passion for hunting, became a key figure in speculations about how he accessed what he later used. Wheelis had permission to enter the depot where prisoners' personal belongings were kept, and it is presumed he recovered a small container hidden inside a jar of cream. Their relationship grew so close that Göring gave him a dedicated photograph, a valuable pen, and a watch engraved with his name. Another version emerged later. Herbert Lee Stivers, a former American soldier responsible for security in Nuremberg, stated in 2005 that he handed over an apparently harmless object at the request of unknown persons who claimed it needed to reach Göring for medical reasons. Although his account was doubted by other witnesses, it is also considered that the Dr. Ludwig Pflücker might have been involved in the episode. Despite the letters Göring left behind, in which he claims to have been prepared beforehand, the mystery of how he managed to carry out his plan remains unsolved. The bomber trapped in the swamp of Papua New Guinea in a remote area of Papua New Guinea, where the Agambo swamp stretches amid dense vegetation, extreme humidity, and constant dangers such as huge crocodiles and malaria-carrying mosquitoes. An unusual discovery caught attention in 1972. Members of the Australian Air Force found in that hostile terrain a completely out-of-place warplane. It was a B-17E Flying Fortress, a four-engine heavy bomber model used by the United States Air Force. The aircraft had originally been operated by Captain Fred Eaton, who flew it in one of the first air offensives of the U.S. military aviation during the world conflict. Until 1941, the U.S. government had tried to keep some distance from the fighting taking place in Europe, and after the experiences of the Great War, the population was not motivated to see their soldiers deployed again. However, the situation changed drastically after the Japanese attack on the U.S. base at Pearl Harbor. This attack, carried out by a direct ally of the Axis powers, caused the death of thousands of people. The magnitude of the event made the only possible reaction for the country a declaration of war. While part of the war effort focused on fighting the Nazi regime in Europe, a considerable part was directed to the Pacific Front. The Japanese army was well equipped and prepared to resist. This front ended with a toll of over 100,000 American soldiers dead. In this context, the fate of the B-17E bomber piloted by Eaton took an unexpected turn. The aircraft was attacked by Japanese fighters after participating in an offensive against enemy ships in New Britain, a territory then occupied by Japan. Although the aircraft structure received hits, the reason for its crash was lack of fuel. The original goal was to return to Long Reach, Queensland, Australia, but the plane ended up crashing in the Agambo swamp on February 23, 1942. Despite the adverse circumstances, the crew survived for 6 weeks, traveling on foot. During that time, they faced diseases such as malaria and exhausting temperatures. When they managed to reunite with US Allied forces, the crew members received a new air assignment just a week later. Coincidentally, that B-17E had belonged to the Kangaroo Squadron, a group that had left San Francisco for Pearl Harbor on the very day of the Japanese attack, December 7, 1941. This coincidence contributed to the disaster, as the radar personnel in Hawaii believed that the aircraft appearing on the screen belonged to the expected squadron, not the enemy. That particular bomber, however, did not travel with them that day. Its arrival occurred shortly after the bombing, Years later, in the 1980s, interest arose in extracting the plane from the place where it had been trapped. David Talashe, who had been a pilot during the conflict and collected historic aircraft, led the operation along with his family and an air rescue specialist named Alfred Hagen. By 2006, the rescue of the plane was completed. It was named the Swamp Ghost, and over time it became a legendary piece among researchers and military aviation enthusiasts. It is considered the best-preserved B-17E among the few that have been found. In February 2010, it was granted permission to be sent to the United States. Finally, on April 10, 2013, the aircraft arrived in Hawaii to be displayed to the public at the Pacific Aviation Museum located in Pearl Harbor. Hitler's Nazi flag. Within the symbolic apparatus of the Nazi regime, one of the most important objects is the so-called Blutfahne, or blood flag. This banner was marked by the events of the failed coup attempt in Munich in 1923, when a group of Hitler's followers tried to seize power in Bavaria. During the march towards the Ministry of Defense, several participants were shot down by the local police. One of them fell onto the flag of Assault Section No. 5, soaking it with his blood. From that moment on, this symbol began to occupy a privileged place within the political ritual of Nazism. After the trial, Hitler regained control of the party and turned the Blutfahne into a ceremonial object. He ordered it to be mounted on a staff with a plaque engraving the names of the 16 members who died during the coup. He also assigned a permanent SS custodian who was responsible for carrying it to each party congress. At party events, Hitler used this flag to bless other Nazi insignias by touching them with it during a consecration ceremony. It was also present at the induction ceremonies of new SS members, where it formed part of the symbolic oath. The Blutfahne was kept in the Brown House, the party headquarters in Munich, under special guard and protection. Its condition remained intact, except for a small tear left as a mark of the fight. Throughout the 1930s, the flag was regularly displayed in parades and public events. Its last recorded appearance was in October 1944 at a ceremony presided over by Himmler. After that point, all traces were lost. Some accounts state that the flag returned to the headquarters and disappeared amid the bombings. Others suggest it was captured as loot by Allied troops entering Munich in 1945. It is even speculated that it might be kept unidentified in a private home abroad. To this day, the whereabouts of the Blutfahne remain unknown. The most ritualistically significant symbol of Hitler's regime remains missing, becoming one of the most sought-after and enigmatic objects of that period. Flight 19 in the Bermuda Triangle, and in December 1945, 5 Avenger torpedo bombers of the U.S. Navy took off from Fort Lauderdale base for a routine training mission over the Atlantic. They were crewed by 14 men, almost all experienced, and the weather posed no difficulties at the start of the flight. This patrol, known as Flight 19, followed a simple triangular route, east over the ocean, then a turn north, and finally back south over land. What was supposed to last a few hours turned into one of the most baffling incidents in military history. The last clear communication came from the mission commander, Lieutenant Taylor. He was heard saying they had lost orientation, could not see land, and that all instruments had failed. The radio transmitted confusing messages, overlapping voices, and contradictory references. Some pilots believed they were flying over the Florida Keys, others claimed they had drifted into the Gulf of Mexico. The tower tried to guide them, but signals weakened until they were lost completely. None of the 5 aircraft returned. Hours later, a Martin Mariner seaplane with 13 people aboard took off to search for the lost squadron. 20 minutes after takeoff, it also disappeared without a trace. In total, 27 people vanished in a single day. The Navy launched a thorough investigation. Ships and planes scoured the area for days. The hypothesis of a massive disorientation caused by a possible geomagnetic storm was considered, although there was no clear meteorological evidence to support this. Some internal reports suggested navigation errors combined with technical problems. However, the final report failed to provide a concrete explanation and classified the case as unknown cause. The story of Flight 19 has since fueled theories ranging from human error to unexplained phenomena. Its disappearance became one of the pillars of the Bermuda Triangle myth. 70 years later, the exact whereabouts of the planes and the 27 people remain unknown. The Yamashita treasure in the Philippines. Towards the end of World War II, as the Axis forces begin to lose ground, one of the most recognized officers of the Japanese army, Tomoyuki Yamashita, leads the defense of the Philippines against the Allied advance. Facing the siege led by General MacArthur, versions emerge pointing to an unexpected decision, hiding a huge amount of valuables in different parts of the archipelago. These are goods accumulated during military campaigns originating from the looting of Asian cities under occupation. The story states that these shipments were buried in a secret tunnel system, intending to prevent their recovery by the victors. General Yamashita surrenders in September 1945. 5 months later, he faces a military tribunal that convicts him. During the trial, he receives direct questions about the whereabouts of this supposed loot, but avoids giving clear answers. His silence gives rise to a narrative that lasts for decades, a collection of ingots, precious stones, and statues hidden underground, still undiscovered. Local search groups organize year after year in hopes of finding some trace. After long, unsuccessful days, a turn occurs in 1970 when an explorer named Rogelio Roxas finds remains of a possible hiding place, a gold Buddha figure and other objects buried near the city of Baguio. The discovery sparks new expeditions throughout the Philippines. The idea that Roxas only found a small part of what was hidden fuels the Yamashita gold fever. However, despite the use of new technological tools such as thermal sensors or laser scans, no further evidence appears. Some versions claim that what was found was taken by other groups. Others suggest that Yamashita himself exaggerated the facts to create confusion among his pursuers. In recent years, excavation work continues, but there are no conclusive results. To this day, the so-called Yamashita treasure remains out of reach, and its existence continues to be one of the great unresolved mysteries of the conflict. The mural in the Naval Dining Hall on the Orkney Islands. On the island of Lam Holm, part of the Orkney archipelago, there is a small concrete building housing a military mess hall where British sailors gather between shifts to eat and rest. Inside this space, there is a mural painted directly on the wall, signed only with the initials AE words. Its author has never been identified. The mural depicts a classical-style scene with maritime motifs and decorative details that do not match the profile of an ordinary soldier. It portrays a serene environment with columns, fruits, instruments, and elements, suggesting technical knowledge of art and visual composition. Although the painting has no evident political or military narrative, its presence in a functional Royal Navy mess hall draws attention due to its level of detail and academic style. For decades, British military heritage historians have tried to discover who is behind the signature. AE words does not appear in any naval personnel lists, nor in records of recruited artists or civilian collaborators at the base. Nor is it found among the Italian prisoners of war who built the nearby Italian chapel, famous for its religious murals. The mess hall where the mural is located is not open to the public, and access to the crew archives who passed through Lam Holm in the 1940s is incomplete. Initial investigations suggest it could be a crew member temporarily assigned to the island, perhaps with prior training in decorative painting or civilian artistic education. Other theories point to a coded tribute or an internal message among Navy members, although nothing in the work directly supports these ideas. The name, which looks like a signature, could be a pseudonym, an alteration of the real name, or even a phrase with hidden meaning. So far, no other similar works signed by this person have been identified. Despite efforts to trace the origin of the painting, researchers have not confirmed who the author was or why it was made. The mural remains in place, protected as a historical piece, while the name AE words remains an unsolved mystery. The lost Nazi base in the Arctic. On a remote island near the North Pole, a team of Russian scientists rediscovered in 2016 the remains of an ancient secret facility built by the German army during World War II. The site is located on Alexandra Land, about 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole, and for decades remained hidden among the snow and ice of the Arctic, out of reach of explorers and archaeologists. The enclave is registered under the codename Schatzgräber, which in German means treasure hunter. Although officially it functions as a strategic weather station, its name raises suspicions about possible additional missions. Some hypotheses suggest that its purpose might include searching for ancient objects or activities beyond the usual scope of a scientific installation. The base began operating in 1942, exactly 1 year after the start of the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Its location was key for military operations in the north, as essential atmospheric data was collected there to guide the movements of submarines, fleets, and troops in the North Atlantic. The extreme climate of the area caused the team working at the station to be completely isolated for long periods. In 1944, the situation changed drastically when the occupants consumed contaminated polar bear meat and became seriously ill. The poisoning forced the complete evacuation of personnel, rescued by a German submarine. Since then, the base remained uninhabited, and over time its exact location was forgotten. Decades later, deep in Alexandra Land, Russian researchers located the frozen ruins of the settlement. They found more than 500 objects preserved in remarkable conditions thanks to the polar climate: bullets, building fragments, uniforms, and a set of documents in relatively good condition. The structures show remains of bunkers, storage systems, and signs of the daily life of the personnel who inhabited the station for 2 years. The discovery reignited theories about the alternative use of the base. Although its official purpose was to collect weather reports, the code name and its isolated nature generate doubts among experts. The previously disputed island now forms part of Russian territory, which plans to establish a new permanent facility in the same place. The mystery about Schatzgräber's true functions remains open. The voyage of the submarine U-530 to Argentina. Shortly after the end of the conflict in Europe, a German submarine suddenly appears off the coast of Argentina. The U-530, a vessel of the IXC-40 class, arrives at the port of Mar del Plata on July 10, 1945, more than 2 months after the German surrender. Its commander, Otto Wermuth, signals that he wishes to surrender to the local authorities, causing surprise and concern among the Argentine sailors. After several maneuvers, the submarine is moored to the dock and its surrender is formalized. The situation immediately raises a series of questions. The crew, made up of young men dressed in dress uniform, does not hand over navigation logs, maps, or documents, as these were destroyed before coming ashore. They also do not have weapons or torpedoes. This lack of evidence fuels speculation. Some media suggest that the U-530 may have transported high-ranking Nazi officials who disembarked earlier on a nearby beach, taking advantage of the extensive and lightly guarded coast of the Buenos Aires province. Among the circulating versions, there is even the possibility that Hitler secretly escaped aboard this submarine. Interrogations of the crew by Argentine forces and later by the Allies multiply without finding solid evidence to support these theories. However, the international press echoes these hypotheses, and several German officers doubt that the surrendered vessel is the original U-530. The disappearance of the submarine's main raft adds further doubts. According to local investigations, a similar craft appeared days earlier on a beach near Mar del Sud, without crew. The involvement of the U-530 in the explosion of the Brazilian cruiser Bahia is also suspected, although a commission concludes it was an internal accident. Despite technical reports and formal statements, the final journey of the U-530 and its true purpose remain shrouded in mystery. The case continues to fuel theories that have not yet been completely ruled out. The Nazi gold train of Walbrzych. In the mountainous region of Lower Silesia, near the Książ castle, lies an underground network of tunnels built by the Nazi regime during the final years of the war. Within this complex, called Project Ries, one of the most persistent stories of the conflict emerges: the alleged hiding of a military train full of valuable objects. The story tells of several armored wagons that disappeared in 1945, just as Soviet troops advanced through Polish territory. The case gained public notoriety when Tadeusz Slowikowski, a former Polish railway worker, claimed to have received direct information about the train's location from a German he helped in a fight. Over time, Slowikowski collected documents, plans, and photos and moved to the city of Walbrzych, where access to the tunnel system is restricted. His search became personal after losing his mother in Auschwitz. Over the decades, he reported threats, raids, and surveillance. In 2015, 2 researchers claimed to have located the train thanks to Slowikowski's indications. They hired a law firm to demand 10% of the value of the find. Although the Polish government avoided publicly confirming the discovery, the news generated international interest and reopened debates about the convoy's contents. It is speculated that inside there could be official Third Reich documents, artworks, ingots, weapons, and even remains of the Amber Room, which once decorated an entire room in the Russian Imperial Palace. Local authorities and historical memory organizations debate who would have the right to these objects if found. The World Jewish Congress warns that if belongings taken from deported families are found, they must be returned to their heirs. Representatives of the Polish state consider all the contents part of the national heritage. From Russia, some voices claim the imperial objects if it is confirmed they were aboard. The train remains missing, but the tunnels continue to be studied. The combination of incomplete records, private interest, and unconfirmed rumors keeps open the possibility that the convoy remains hidden underground. The Foo Fighters, lights that chase in the darkness. Towards the end of World War II, reports from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron began to include unusual details. Besides describing engagements over the Rhine, crew members mentioned very intense orange lights that positioned themselves near their wings without leaving any trace on radar. One night in November 1944, 3 members of that squadron were flying over the northern area of Strasbourg when they noticed between 8 and 10 bright flashes on their left flank. Maneuvers to approach them achieved nothing. The objects disappeared and later reappeared as if part of the same pattern. These lights, without any visible solid shape, inspired one crew member to name them using a term taken from a popular firefighter comic strip, Foo Fighters. Reports accumulated. The lights followed the planes at high speed. Adopted colors such as red, orange, or green appeared alone or in groups, outmaneuvered defensive actions, and were never recorded on instruments. In March 1942, a Wellington bomber crewed by Poles was flying over Germany when its rear gunner spotted a glow the size of the moon. It approached to less than 200 meters, received fire from the turret without showing damage, and then positioned itself next to the wing. Shots from the front also had no effect. After a few minutes, it moved away. Another aircraft behind experienced something similar, but its crew preferred not to report it. In October 1944, another US squadron detected an object behind one of their planes. The pilot performed evasive maneuvers, entered dense clouds, and never saw it again. The radar operator was deeply disturbed. Files record more than 100 sightings in Western Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Pacific. Cases were also noted over Eastern Europe and North Africa. Before being called Foo Fighters, many pilots named them the Light or the Thing. Some versions spoke of cylindrical shapes or ones with windows, even objects resembling inverted bathtubs. Attacks failed to affect them. Sometimes they appeared in areas with no known aerial activity. During bombings over Germany, the sky was filled with flares, markers, and searchlights. Crews could recognize these. So-called scarecrows exploded in the air, simulating shoot-downs, though many times they were real. None of these effects matched the behavior of the Foo Fighters. Allied reports proposed theories about German weapons, such as anti-aircraft missiles or radio-guided devices. Suspicions about rockets were common since 1943. However, it was difficult to explain how these devices could move so fast, change direction, and withstand gunfire. Investigations yielded no clear answers. By late 1944, reports also emerged from the Pacific. Bombers over Japan reported seeing luminous spheres floating near their routes. Some suggested a connection with Germany, though it was too late for that technology to be deployed. With the end of the conflict, sightings decreased and the phenomenon ceased to be investigated. Mentions of the Foo Fighters reappeared decades later, compared to modern encounters with unidentified flying objects. Although explanations were never confirmed, pilot testimonies remain among the most extensive records of anomalous lights in combat. Nothing found in secret German archives or interrogations of their technicians solved the mystery. The Foo Fighters disappear at the war's end, leaving no physical trace or technical explanation. The only thing left are the accounts of those who saw them from a few meters away without understanding what they were. The betrayal of Jean Moulin. Jean Moulin, under the pseudonym Max, coordinates the clandestine movements in occupied France. After consolidating the National Council of the Resistance and structuring the secret army, he manages to make different groups act as one. With direct backing from Charles de Gaulle, he establishes contact with London and prepares the resistance to support a future Allied landing. In June 1943, when the underground network reaches its strongest point, a key meeting is organized in Lyon to appoint the successor of Charles Delestrant, recently captured by the Gestapo. That meeting ends with the arrest of several leaders, including Moulin. Only one manages to leave the place without being arrested, René Hardy. Hardy, a former railway engineer, is part of the resistance and had been detained by the Germans a few days before. After his unexpected release, he shows up at the meeting uninvited and is the only one to escape. He then disappears without a trace. After the war, his behavior makes him the prime suspect for having revealed the location of the meeting. Although the judicial processes opened do not find enough evidence to convict him, his figure generates persistent doubts. In 1987, Klaus Barbie, the head of the Gestapo in Lyon, states that Hardy had collaborated as an informant. No court validates this accusation, but suspicion persists. Moulin is taken to Montluc prison, where Barbie interrogates him. For several days, he suffers continuous torture that leaves him on the brink of death. He is transferred by train to Germany, but dies en route from his wounds. He never reveals information nor identifies collaborators. His disappearance leaves the resistance without its main link to Free France. From then on, tensions increase between de Gaulle and the communist sectors, strengthened by the Soviet advance. The Hardy case remains unresolved. Although he faces trials after the war, he is never declared guilty. The versions about who the betrayer was vary, but the circumstances around the Lyon meeting keep his name as the main mystery. No conclusive documents are found, and the available testimonies do not allow establishing direct responsibility. In December 1964, the remains of Jean Moulin are brought to the Pantheon in Paris. President de Gaulle leads the ceremony, and the speech is given by André Malraux. His figure is consecrated as a symbol of the French resistance, although the identity of the person responsible for his capture is never confirmed. The Amber Room, the treasure that disappeared with the Nazis in 1941, German soldiers took the famous Amber Room from St. Petersburg. This hall, considered a jewel of European Baroque, had been built by Prussian craftsmen in the 18th century and gifted by Frederick William to Peter the Great. In the midst of the war, the Nazis dismantled it, intending to include it in Hitler's planned personal museum in Linz, but it never appeared there or anywhere else. 80 years after the theft, its location remains unknown. During the German retreat, the room was sent from Riga to Königsberg. There, historian Alfred Rode studied it for a time. Some believe he decided to hide it. Rode, an amber expert, stayed in the city during the final months of the war, and some say he kept it under lock and key. Another version points to its destruction during British bombings of the city or during the Red Army's entry in 1945. The pieces never reappeared complete, although isolated fragments like an amber chest of drawers or a Florentine mosaic surfaced decades later in Germany. Over the years, searches were conducted in tunnels, bunkers, and mines. An expedition in the Baltic Sea claimed the ship carrying it was sunk by a Soviet torpedo, but searches found no remains. Some suggest it was moved to the United States, though without evidence. The mystery remains unsolved. At the Catherine Palace, where it originally stood, an exact replica was built between 1979 and 2003 using amber from the Baltic coast. The restoration used over 1,000 kilograms of material to cover 3 of its 4 walls. Today, thousands of visitors tour the reconstructed room, which retains the bright atmosphere of the original. The replica was inaugurated by the presidents of Russia and Germany, aiming to close a symbolic wound. Meanwhile, Russian and German historians continue to review archives and hidden locations. The enigma of what happened to the original room remains intact. No one can say for sure if it was destroyed, buried, or kept in an unknown place. Numerical coincidences before Pearl Harbor. 75 years after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which took place on December 7, 1941, a strange detail still persists. Although studies have covered the military, diplomatic, and personal aspects of that day, there are elements that remain unexplained. One of the most talked about is an advertisement that appeared in the New Yorker shortly before the attack. On November 20th of that year, an ad titled "Attention Warning Alert" was published, showing several people in an underground shelter passing the time with a dice game. The text suggested being prepared for a long winter night in a shelter and recommended including a game called the Deadly Double among one's belongings. This main ad was accompanied by 6 smaller versions scattered throughout the same issue, all featuring images of dice. These dice displayed the numbers 12 and 7, which later caught the attention of certain intelligence members. During the war, naval pilot Joseph Bell heard a Secret Service officer claim that some believed the ad contained a coded message. According to that account, the material was personally delivered to the magazine's headquarters and paid for in cash. Official investigations yielded no useful clues. Years later, historian Craig Nelson revisited this story during his research for the book Pearl Harbor, From Infamy to Greatness. He found references to the case in files from the 1950s and noted that the FBI had already followed several leads without success. Nelson himself considered that the dice could represent many other possible combinations and not necessarily a date. Still, he admitted that the advertisement seemed peculiar. Over time, it was discovered that the deadly double game did indeed exist, although no evidence was found linking it to the Pearl Harbor incident. Some readers located references to the product that explained its origin as mere entertainment, debunking part of the rumor. Nevertheless, the coincidence of the numbers matching the date of the attack and the text's allusion to air raid shelters continues to leave room for doubt. The death of Raul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat renowned for saving thousands of Jews in Budapest, was arrested by Soviet troops on January 17, 1945. From that moment on, he vanished. In 1957, Moscow claimed that he died of a heart attack in Lubyanka prison on July 17, 1947, and that his body was cremated without an autopsy. The note came from the prison doctor, but no further evidence accompanied the report. Wallenberg's family and the Swedish government disputed this version. Later testimonies claimed he remained alive in Gulag camps for many more years. Some even said they saw him in the 1980s. No official Soviet document confirmed either his death or his exact whereabouts after his arrest. Declassified documents suggest that high-ranking figures such as Stalin, Molotov, and Abakumov were involved. One theory proposes that he died during an interrogation or through direct execution. Although Russia acknowledged its responsibility in the year 2000, it released no files clarifying the events. Nor have any records been found to prove what happened to him after 1945. In 1989, Soviet authorities handed his passport and diary to his family, which had been kept in secret archives. This fueled doubts about whether he truly died in 1947. In 2016, Sweden declared him legally dead, setting the symbolic date as July 31, 1952, 5 years after his supposed death. Efforts to declassify key files have been partial. Many requests have been denied or answered without concrete information. The most recent accounts rely on memoirs of former KGB officials who claim Wallenberg never left the Soviet prison system and that his execution was decided by Stalin's inner circle. Despite decades of investigation, neither the whereabouts of his remains nor the definitive cause of his death have been confirmed. His case has become a symbol of enforced disappearances under totalitarian regimes. To this day, Raul Wallenberg's fate remains unresolved, and his story continues to inspire new inquiries in search of a truth still buried in post-war archives. Rudolf Hess's journey to Scotland. One night in May 1941, a Scottish farmer finds a crashed German plane and the pilot, who introduces himself as Alfred Horn. But the visitor is no ordinary aviator. He is Rudolf Hess, one of the leaders of the Nazi regime and a close associate of Hitler since the early days. He joined the party in 1920, took part in the failed coup attempt, accompanied Hitler in prison, and transcribed the ideological manifesto that would shape the Third Reich. In the hierarchy of power, only Hermann Göring outranks him. Hess embarks on a solo flight from Munich to Scotland in a Messerschmitt fighter, crossing the North Sea on a cloudy night with no visibility. His destination is Dungerville House, owned by the Duke of Hamilton, whom he believes to be sympathetic to a peace deal. He tries to meet him, hoping that Britain will accept an agreement with Germany in exchange for continental dominance. But Hamilton, a loyal officer of the United Kingdom, rejects any proposal. The mission fails from the start. Witnesses say Hitler reacts with fury when he hears of the flight. Joseph Goebbels fears the British will use it for propaganda, while Albert Speer hears him shouting in confusion over the possible political consequences. Hess himself, in despair, attempts to take his own life in his cell shortly afterwards. He remains a British prisoner for years and is later taken to the Nuremberg trials, where he is sentenced to life imprisonment. He spends over 4 decades locked up in Spandau prison, being its sole inmate for more than 20 years until he dies at the age of 93. Authorities declare it a suicide, but his son and many others insist he was murdered to silence him. The most debated theory is whether he acted on his own initiative or with Hitler's knowledge. Documents found in Moscow suggest that the dictator received an explanatory letter the day after the flight. His aide Karl-Heinz Pinch wrote that the mission sought a pact or British neutrality ahead of the impending invasion of the Soviet Union, but British archives contradict this, showing he was treated as an isolated envoy. To this day, some key parts of the file remain classified. Mussolini's Sword of Islam. In March 1937, Benito Mussolini traveled to Libya, a colony under Italian control, and received a ceremonial gift in an event carefully planned by his propaganda apparatus. A decorative sword called the Sword of Islam, intended to reinforce his image as an ally of the Arab world. The object was presented in the Bouguera oasis near Tripoli by the Berber leader Yusuf Kerbish. During the event, a famous photograph was taken showing Mussolini on horseback holding the sword, but the image was altered, airbrushing out a soldier holding the reins. 1 year later, a statue with the same pose was placed in Tripoli. The sword, although presented as an Arab piece, was manufactured in Florence, and its existence served a propagandistic purpose. The Italian regime had been approaching the Arab world for years, trying to show cultural and political affinity. Since 1934, the Radio Bari station had been broadcasting programs in Arabic directed at North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. With the Abyssinian War, this policy was strengthened, and many Arabs showed sympathy for Italy, considering the Ethiopian emperor a Muslim oppressor. In this context, the Italian dictator proclaimed himself a defender of Islam. The sword disappeared 6 years later, in July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime. Raquel Mussolini, the dictator's wife, claimed that the piece was stolen by anti-fascist groups from inside a display case in her private residence at Rocca di Caminate, a fortress used by the family. Since then, no verifiable traces of its whereabouts have been found. No official inventory exists to track its current location, and the object has never been recovered. Today, the sword is considered one of the most enigmatic, symbolic pieces of Mussolini's regime. It remains classified as missing and appears in historical records as part of the lost heritage following the collapse of fascism. Some authors researching the relationship between Italy and the Islamic world have addressed the case in their studies, but have not made progress confirming whether the sword still exists or was destroyed after being looted. The exact fate of this political symbol remains unresolved. The man from Peking lost fossils. During the 1930s, an international team of archaeologists discovered the remains of an ancient hominid south of Beijing at the Zhoukoudian site. Scientists named this specimen Homo erectus pekinensis and estimated its age between 300,000 and 500,000 years. The discovery is a key piece in understanding human evolution in Asia and became an emblem of 20th century paleoanthropology. With the Japanese advance during World War II, Chinese authorities, supported by the United States, decided to remove the fossils from the country to keep them safe. In 1941, U.S. military personnel packed the original remains to send them by sea from Qinhuangdao to America. Amid the war, the route collapsed. The shipment disappeared without a trace. Decades later, a former U.S. soldier stationed at the same base claimed to have seen boxes buried with bones in the area during the days before the communist takeover. The testimony attracted the attention of several researchers. One of them, South African Lee Berger, published a study with Chinese colleagues from the Institute of Paleontology. According to their conclusions, the remains might still be underground, right beneath a modern parking lot in Qinhuangdao built over the old Chinese-American military facility. The governments of China and the United States have launched multiple search operations. They have also offered significant rewards to anyone who locates the fossils, but so far without success. Some hypotheses suggest the remains may have been stolen by Japanese troops. Others suspect they are in the hands of black market smugglers. The whereabouts of these remains remain a mystery. Although the originals are lost, scientists continue to work with precise molds made before their disappearance. At the Jokudian site, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, fragments continue to be found, though none as complete as the first ones. The mystery of the bones of the Peking man remains open. According to recent studies, they might be hidden beneath an ordinary urban area, invisible under a layer of concrete. The boxes, if they exist, wait silently under the cars, as if humanity's most distant past still resists being returned. The Battle of Los Angeles. In the early hours of February 25, 1942, air raid sirens sounded throughout Los Angeles County. It had been barely 3 months since the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the atmosphere in California was tense. Authorities activated the protocol for a possible bombing. The city was plunged into darkness by a mandatory blackout. Troops with anti-aircraft weapons took positions. For an hour, from 3 to 4 in the morning, cannons and machine guns fired relentlessly into the sky. The beams of searchlights illuminated the night sky. Thousands of projectiles streaked through the air. The population watched fearfully from their homes. However, no planes were sighted. Only smoke and flashes appeared over the city. Colonel John G. Murphy, in command of an artillery unit, later stated that no aircraft, neither enemy nor Allied, was detected. 5 people died during the incident, some from shrapnel wounds, others from heart attacks related to the chaos. In the following days, newspapers dubbed the event the Battle of Los Angeles. Images of spotlights aimed at the sky and reports of massive gunfire filled the headlines. The official version stated it was a false alarm. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox claimed the reaction was provoked by the widespread atmosphere of fear. He attributed it to so-called war nerves, a phenomenon affecting both civilians and troops. The explanation reassured part of the population. However, others began to wonder if something more had happened. Over time, alternative theories emerged. Some believe that the military fired on something unknown that night. The hypothesis of a weather balloon lost at high altitude was proposed as a probable cause in the 1980s. Still, for certain UFO research groups, that object did not correspond to anything terrestrial. The United States Air Force documents retain the report of the incident. To this day, the files acknowledge that the alarm was not based on any real attack. What happened that night continues to raise doubts. For many, it was an episode of collective hysteria. For others, the sky over Los Angeles concealed something that was never fully explained. Subhas Chandra Bose and his possible escape. Japanese authorities report that Subhas Chandra Bose died on August 18, 1945, following a plane crash in Taiwan, and that his body was cremated shortly afterward at Taihoku Hospital. However, no external observer confirms this version. The only direct survivor of the alleged incident, Colonel Habibur Rahman, avoids formally communicating the news to his superiors in the Indian National Army or his colleagues in Bangkok, Singapore, Saigon, or Tokyo. This silence is impossible to justify unless he was involved alongside Japanese commanders in a clandestine escape operation organized by Bose. There is no official document of the supposed accident. Although Japan maintained control of Taipei until the end of October that year, and a British intelligence mission led by Finney investigated the matter in September, there is no record of the airport file being reviewed. A letter dated June 1956, signed by the head of the Asian section of the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, confirms that until then no formal investigation had ever been conducted to clarify the accident. This total lack of evidence reinforces the hypothesis of an intentional disappearance. On August 20th, 1945, 2 days after the alleged crash, a message from the Japanese General Staff under the command of Hikari Kikan states that T, Bose's code name, died in an accident and that the body was transferred to Tokyo by troops from Formosa. This claim contradicts the official version, according to which the remains were cremated in Taihoku. An important testimony comes from S.A. Ayer, former propaganda minister of the Provisional Government of Azad Hind. He recounts that the first time he hears about Bose's death is on August 20th, when Vice Admiral Chuda of the Japanese Navy mentions it to him at Saigon Airport. Later, en route to Japan, he receives another version from Colonel Tada. According to him, Bose's plane crashed on August 18th in Taihoku. The leader was seriously injured and died that same night, while Habibur Rahman survived with minor injuries and was admitted to a hospital. Ayer responds that Indians, both in Asia and in their country, would not accept that explanation without visible proof. He requests to travel to Taihoku to see the body, but never receives authorization. The lack of official documents, the silence of the only survivor, and the refusal to show the remains prevent the case from being closed. Official records leave open the possibility that Bose faked his death. The doubt remains unresolved. Where was Subhas Chandra Bose really after August 18, 1945? The British soldiers in Auschwitz during routine conservation work in the ruins of an old bunker within the Auschwitz complex. A team of experts comes across an unexpected find. Under the rubble, Polish historian Dominik Synowic discovers a small piece of white celluloid bearing the pencil-written surnames of 17 British soldiers. The names appear in uppercase, accompanied by a list of numbers in one corner. 8 of them are marked with a check mark. On the back of the same document, there are common German words translated into English, such as now, never, and from then. The discovery completely baffles the researchers. No official source records the presence of British soldiers in the extermination camp. Some hypotheses suggest they might have been Jewish prisoners of war transferred to Auschwitz from other parts of the front. Others propose that they may have belonged to some irregular British unit linked to the Axis forces. Polish authorities confirm the list's authenticity and request cooperation from the United Kingdom's military archives to trace the names. The location where the document appears corresponds to the area of the former Monowitz subcamp, a section of Auschwitz mainly designated for prisoners of war, including British soldiers captured during various campaigns. However, the direct connection between that group and the extermination camp remains unclear. The appearance of the document coincides with another isolated find within the wall of an old building that had served as a warehouse for the camp guards. In that case, workers find a prisoner list hidden inside a bottle sealed in the mortar. Both discoveries reinforce the idea that documentary remains are still hidden in the site's structures, whose interpretation is still ongoing. The origin of the soldiers, their exact role in Auschwitz, and why their names appear together on that sheet remain unexplained. The mystery remains open. The missing crew of the Airship L8. On August 16, 1942, the U.S. Navy Airship L8 took off from the artificial island of Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay as part of a mission to monitor the possible presence of Japanese submarines along the Pacific coast. On board were Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, both with prior experience as airship pilots. The aircraft, a former Goodyear promotional balloon adapted for military use, was part of the Air Patrol Squadron deployed following the United States entry into World War II. During the first hour and a half of the flight, reports indicated normal conditions. At 7:50 a.m., Cody and Adams radioed that they had detected an oil slick on the water, a possible sign of an enemy submarine. They reported that they would investigate. That was the last contact with the crew. Hours later, the airship appeared over the city of Daly City, California, descending uncontrollably. The vessel, already partially deflated, brushed rooftops, dragged electrical wires, and finally crashed in a residential street. Firefighters and police immediately responded to the crash site. When they opened the control cabin, they found the airship empty. There were no signs of fire or struggle. The controls were intact, the radio worked perfectly, and the parachutes were in place. The only things missing were the 2 crew members and their life vests, popularly known as Mae Wests. However, pilots typically wore these during flight, so their absence was inconclusive. The disappearance caused confusion in the early hours. A nearby military base mistakenly reported that the L8 had landed and that its occupants were safe, but this information was quickly disproved. In fact, several civilian witnesses saw the airship descending without crew aboard. Some claimed to have seen 3 men on board, others said they saw parachutes deploying, but no version could be verified. The airship had flown over populated areas and was followed by numerous bystanders who described its appearance as a broken sausage drifting aimlessly. Police attempted to confiscate photographs taken by onlookers, which fueled further speculation. Meanwhile, the Navy organized intensive searches in nearby waters, suspecting that both pilots might have accidentally fallen into the sea. It was even considered that they were picked up by a ship maintaining radio silence for tactical reasons. No bodies or signs of them were found, and the mystery remained. Although one of the anti-submarine charges launched was recovered, There were no other physical clues to reconstruct what happened. Over the following decades, all kinds of hypotheses were proposed. Some believe they were captured by the enemy or killed by a stowaway. Others suggest a fight between them or even a planned desertion. Extreme theories, such as the possibility of an abduction, also arose. The most accepted explanation is that one man left the cabin to make a repair and fell into the ocean, and the other, trying to assist him, also ended up outside the ship. However, this theory does not explain why neither used the working radio to call for help or left any sign. Several experts, including aviation historian Dan Grossman, argue that a trained sailor never abandons his ship without an urgent reason, casting doubt on this assumption. The L8 airship was repaired and continued service during the war. It later returned to Goodyear, where its cabin was reused in another model and later incorporated into the collection of the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. The story, however, remains unresolved. To this day, no one has been able to explain what happened to Cody and Adams after taking off that morning. The airship, dubbed by the press as the Ghost Airship, became a symbol of an unsolved mystery in the midst of World War II. After reviewing each of these episodes, it is clear that the existing information still leaves many unanswered questions. These are not rumors or stories built up over time, but documented events whose interpretation remains open. Until new evidence emerges, these 25 specific points will remain in that area where history remains unresolved.